Israeli strikes in Gaza killed tens of Palestinians on Tuesday, local authorities said. That's as Israel's forces tightened their siege around Jabalia in the north of the enclave, amid fierce battles with Hamas-led fighters. Palestinian health officials said over 10 people had died in a fire near Al-Fallujah in Jabalia, the largest of Gaza's 8 historic refugee camps. Several were reported killed after a strike on Nusayrat camp. Missiles also reportedly hit houses in Khan Yunis and Gaza City. Zarifa Abu Tamia, whose house was hit in Khan Yunis, mourned her cousin Mona.
They didn't give us any warning. We were sleeping, all of us, and no one was awake. I only woke up when people woke me up and said, "You are alive." I was in the same place I was. I started searching for Mona because she was in the same room with me. I started looking for her but couldn't find her.
Jabalia has been the focus of an Israeli offensive for more than 10 days. Israel's military has now encircled the camp there and sent tanks to nearby towns. They've said their aim is to stamp out Hamas fighters who are trying to regroup there and have told residents to evacuate. But the UN said the military appeared to be, quote, cutting off North Gaza completely from the rest of the Gaza Strip. Israel launched the offensive against Hamas after the militant group's October the 7th cross-border attack, in which, according to Israeli tallies, 1,200 people were killed. Gaza's health authorities say over 42,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's retaliatory offensive.
Hezbollah is preparing for a long war of attrition in South Lebanon after Israel wiped out its top leadership, according to 2 sources familiar with its operations. 3 weeks of devastating Israeli blows have diminished Hezbollah's capabilities. But a new military command now directs rocket fire, like this strike on a northern Israeli town and the conflict with Israeli troops now on the ground in southern Lebanon, they said. The operations room was set up 72 hours after the group's leader Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was killed, a Hezbollah field commander and a source close to the group told Reuters. The field commander described the command center as a narrow circle in direct contact with the field and said it operated in total secrecy. After Reuters published that information, Hezbollah's media office issued a statement saying the information attributed to a Hezbollah field commander was false, adding that there are no sources in Hezbollah. Hezbollah has not named a new leader after Nasrallah, with the most likely successor also killed.
What Hezbollah needs now is
Andreas Krieg of King's College London said the Iran-backed group was operating as a decentralized guerrilla movement.
And so we'll see different cells operating more or less autonomously from the central core. And this way they're a very resilient fighting force, because even though Israel has severely degraded the strategic leadership, operational leadership of Hezbollah, they've also degraded the communication system. The different cells of the guerrilla movement are still operating fairly well.
Hezbollah's war of attrition would depend on its tunnel network, which Israel says extends for hundreds of miles. Israel's military released this video footage, which Reuters couldn't verify, said to show deep tunnels captured by its soldiers. The Hezbollah field commander called the tunnels the foundation of the battle. Mohanad Haj Ali of the Beirut-based Carnegie Middle East Center.
We haven't seen any sophisticated strikes against the tunnel system so far, which suggests that Hezbollah will maintain an ability to strike against Israeli forces in the south, even as Israel uses immense firepower and massive destruction against the towns around the border region. So I think the question of how will Hezbollah resist and how strong will the pushback be is banking on whether Israel has any more surprises up its sleeves, or we've moved beyond that, and now it's a regular ground invasion of which Hezbollah is fully prepared and will inflict casualties on the Israeli side.
Israel says its strikes have severely depleted Hezbollah's arsenal and killed hundreds of fighters. But the group still has a considerable stockpile of weapons, and it has yet to use its most powerful precision missiles, 4 sources familiar with its operations said. Krieg of King's College London again.
I think Hezbollah is holding back ballistic missiles for a kind of time of no return, if you will. These are the weapons of last resort, which is surprising considering that Hezbollah is under immense pressure.
Israeli officials have said Hezbollah has been firing 100 to 200 missiles and rockets a day on average, and not the thousands expected, which shows significant weakening. It says its operations in Lebanon are aimed at securing the return of tens of thousands of people displaced from their homes in northern Israel. More than 1 million Lebanese have been displaced, according to Lebanese authorities.
China said its day of war games around democratically governed Taiwan on Monday was a warning against separatist acts. They have threatened more could be in the offing. Though apparently shorter than previous drills, they were intense in terms of swift simulated attacks and deployment of ships and aircraft. But what was China trying to achieve with these drills?
上午8点30分。
The Chinese military said the drills practiced blockading Taiwan's maritime lifeline for imports. It aimed to flex its ability to stop the offloading of crucial liquefied natural gas, or LNG, according to one Chinese military expert in local media. Such a tactic could isolate Taiwan ahead of any full-blown invasion. However, Taiwan's state-run energy company said on Monday LNG imports had been unaffected. Here's the director of Defense Strategy and Resources at Taiwan's top military think tank, Su Ju-yun.
This drill was actually not a so-called punishment. Most importantly, China wanted to show the whole world its ambitions and its political goals. This is why we say that this kind of military action by China is 70% political and 30% military. It is mostly a political exercise. This time there was a rather special component, the so-called quarantine or blockade, during which they practiced their blockading abilities. This is why Taiwan kept its guard up.
A map issued by China's military showed drill zones closer to Taiwan than in previous exercises. For the first time, it included areas within Taiwan's 24-mile contiguous zone. China's Coast Guard, the world's largest by far, also patrolled around the island in unprecedented numbers, according to an analyst. Taiwan officials say use of the Coast Guard is part of a gray zone strategy. It stops short of war, but aims to enforce what China calls its right to manage and control the Taiwan Strait. The drills drew quick condemnation from the Taiwan and the United States governments. But Ju-yun says the drills are an opportunity for Taiwan to learn formations and Chinese military tactics, and it must also prepare for further tensions in the future.
Taiwan has to first strengthen its defensive capabilities, including all kinds of anti-ship missiles and air defense missiles, which is the priority. In this situation, Beijing will not be confident to use force. In other words, only if we stay pessimistic militarily can we really maintain peace.
Inside this underground laboratory, China hopes to win a global race to solve one of the biggest mysteries in particle physics. The $300 million Jiangmen Underground Neutrino Observatory, or JUNO, is located 2,300 feet beneath the surface of the southern Guangdong province. It will soon start gathering data on neutrinos, a product of nuclear reactions. Trillions of extremely small neutrinos pass through matter, including the human body, every second. Chao Jun is the deputy manager of JUNO.
One neutrino can change to another neutrino at a flight. So such a special property may have a big impact to the nature, how nature works and how the universe evolves.
JUNO comprises a giant sphere equipped with thousands of light-detecting tubes. In the coming months, it'll be sealed in a 12-story cylindrical pool of water. Chinese physicists and scientists from all over the world will analyze the data on neutrinos emitted by 2 nuclear power plants.
In 6 years, we will get some answer on our primary goal to measure the neutrino mass ordering, and we plan to run this experiment for 30 years.
Neutrino observatories are also being constructed in other nations. Juno is due to go operational in the latter half of 2025. That's well ahead of the far larger June, under construction in the US, which has been plagued by delays and budget overruns. June, or the Deep Underground Neutrino Experiment, is expected to come online around 2030. As for the real-life neutrino applications, they remain a distant prospect so far. However, some scientists have mulled the possibility of relaying long-distance messages via neutrinos, which pass through solid matter, such as the Earth, at near light speed.
Millions of people across southern Africa are facing the worst food crisis in decades. That's according to the World Food Programme on Tuesday. The UN agency warned that its ability to provide relief hangs in the balance due to funding shortfalls. There are unprecedented drought conditions in a record 5 countries: Lesotho, Malawi, Namibia, Zambia and Zimbabwe. The agency has declared a state of disaster and called for international humanitarian support. WFP's regional officer, Thompson Fury, said this major issue could deepen into a, quote, full-scale humanitarian crisis.
Millions of people risk going hungry as Southern Africa enters lean season. The United Nations World Food Programme is today calling for urgent assistance to prevent a widespread drought triggered by the El Niño phenomenon from deepening into a full-scale humanitarian catastrophe. A historic drought, the worst food crisis yet, has devastated more than 27 million lives across the region. Some 21 million children in Southern Africa are malnourished.
WFP is planning to provide food and in some cases cash to more than 6.5 million people in the 7 hardest hit countries. That would cover the period until the next harvest in March. But the WFP said that it's only received about a fifth of the $369 million it needed.
October in Southern Africa marks the start of the lean season, and each month is expected to be worse than the previous one until harvest next year in March and April. Crops have failed, livestock has perished, and children are lucky to receive 1 meal per day. The situation is dire, and the need for action has never been clearer.
Wall Street's main indexes closed lower on Tuesday as chip stocks tumbled and the energy sector slid along with oil prices. The Dow and S&P 500 each shed 0.75%, and the Nasdaq dropped 1%. The energy index finished down 3% for its biggest one-day percentage decline since early October 2023, as crude prices fell on weaker demand expectations. Still, Cole Smead, Chief Executive Officer and Portfolio Manager at Smead Capital Management, sees the sector as a stronghold.
If you look at CapEx as a percentage of operating cash flow, the history of energy businesses is they always drilled too much. It was kind of the old drill, baby, drill, for lack of a better term. And what they've transformed into is now they're investing vehicles. They are companies that produce high levels of free cash flow. They don't drill like they did in the past. And when you track drilling was what they call CapEx. So when you track CapEx as a percentage of operating cash flow, you'll find it's gone to very low levels. And what that's done is it unleashed the free cash flow.
In other movers, chip equipment maker ASML Holdings' U.S.-listed shares tumbled 16% after reporting downbeat expectations for 2025 sales. That helped drag down the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index 5.3% for its biggest one-day drop since early September. And fresh from a record-high close on Monday, shares of NVIDIA fell more than 4.5% after a media report said the Biden administration is considering capping AI chip exports by U.S. companies. Switching to retail, shares of Walgreens Boots Alliance rallied nearly 16% after the pharmacy company narrowly beat Wall Street's lowered estimates for fourth-quarter adjusted profit and announced plans to shut 1,200 stores to cut costs.
British inflation dropped sharply in September. Wednesday's data showed it fell to 1.7% last month, better than analyst forecasts. That was down from 2.2% in August and the lowest reading in 3.5 years. British officials said the number was driven down by lower airfares and petrol prices. Key price indicators watched by the Bank of England also fell. Core inflation, which excludes energy, food, alcohol and tobacco, dropped to 3.2%, slightly down from August. While services inflation sank to its lowest in 2.5 years at 4.9%, well down from August's reading. It added to bets the central bank would cut rates next month. Interest rate futures showed investors were putting a 90% chance on 2 point rate cuts by the end of this year. Britain's Finance Ministry welcomed the fall in inflation. It offers a helpful backdrop for Chancellor Rachel Reeves as she readies her first budget due on October 30th. Reeves has struggled to find the extra money to invest in public services and new infrastructure without spooking investors. Her spending plans will be watched closely by the Bank of England.
Some of Wall Street's biggest banks reported better than expected results on Tuesday, as more deal-making boosted investment banking fees in the third quarter. Goldman Sachs said its investment banking fees rose 20% in the quarter, while Bank of America posted an 18% rise. Investment banking was a bright spot at Citi for the second straight quarter. It saw revenue jump 31%, driven largely by investment-grade debt issuance. Last week, JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo also posted strong investment banking fees in their earnings reports. One of the quarter's largest deals was the $36 billion takeover of Cheez-It maker Kellanova by candy giant Mars. Citi served as a financial advisor to Mars. It also provided Mars with financing, along with JP Morgan. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs served as a financial advisor to Kellanova. Bank executives saw M&A activity picking up, saying they're optimistic about the end of the year as they anticipate rate cuts over the next few months by the Federal Reserve and central banks around the world will increase the pipeline of deals as borrowing becomes cheaper. Despite the optimism, dealmakers will be keenly watching the U.S. elections and the geopolitical situation as they add to regulatory and other uncertainties.
The world's biggest luxury group has a growing problem with China. French giant LVMH on Tuesday reported a 3% fall in sales over the third quarter, dropping to just under $21 billion. That was their first decline since the pandemic era. Sales in Asia outside Japan, which largely means China, plunged 16%. The country's post-health crisis spending spree faded away last year, with a property crisis weighing on consumer confidence. Hopes that government stimulus measures would revive spending appetites have yet to pan out. The new numbers disappointed analysts who had forecast modest growth. One told Reuters that LVMH badly undershot expectations, posting misses across the board. The firm's key fashion and leather division, home to labels like Louis Vuitton and Dior, saw sales decline by 5%. That was miles off forecasts for a 4% rise, and the first drop since 2020. It all came after news of an even bigger decline at Italian rival Ferragamo, adding to a sense of deepening gloom. Now the LVMH figures are likely to weigh on luxury stocks, with the firm considered a bellwether for the whole sector. Analysts at UBS now predict the third quarter will be the worst for luxury brands in 4 years. They forecast a 1% decline in year-on-year sales.
In the labs of the University of Santiago, scientists are exploring an unexpected source of energy, this slimy green seaweed.
Algae use light to oxidize water, and in the process, they release electrons.
Scientists in Chile are investigating ways to improve efficiency in electricity production. Their field is biophotovoltaics, an energy-generating technology that uses photosynthetic organisms like seaweed to convert light into electrical energy. Federico Tasca, a researcher and associate professor at the University of Santiago, explains.
The project consists of the development of biophotovoltaics panels. Now, what are biophotovoltaics panels? They are a way to transform electric energy through algae. where we're going to place this algae on electrodes. Algae use light to oxidize water, and in the process, they release electrons. We collect these electrons in an electric circuit where we are precisely going to build potential difference.
Donde justamente vamos a construir una diferencia de potencial.
Similar projects have previously used microalgae, which are single-celled organisms. His team is taking a different approach.
Las macroalgas son más robustas, son más fáciles.
Microalgae are more hardy, easier to work with, easier to harvest. So that makes all the operations behind the creation and construction of the biophotovoltaic panel simpler.
La construcción del biofotopanel sea más simple.
While the process is still far from being energy efficient, Tasca notes that seaweed could be useful in situations where other alternatives aren't available.
Entonces, si no hay otras soluciones,
So if there are no other solutions, it's a good system to feed energy to a light bulb, to light up some LEDs. For this, it does work.
Por esto sí sirve, por esto sí funciona.
Alejandra Moen, head of the University of Santiago's Marine Biology Department, also believes seaweed holds untapped potential.
I have always said that algae, or what is in the sea, in this case the photosynthetics found in the sea, like marine macroalgae, are like a treasure. It's as if there was a treasure buried at sea. They're full of genes and molecules that we still don't know enough about.
Boeing sought to shore up its sagging finances on Tuesday as a bitter worker strike entered its second month. The plane maker announced plans to raise up to $25 billion through stock and debt offerings and a $10 billion credit agreement with major lenders. Boeing is grappling with a slump in production of its best-selling 737 MAX jet following a mid-air door panel blowout earlier this year and a prolonged strike by thousands of union factory workers. The strike is costing the company more than $1 billion a month, according to one estimate. Boeing announced it would cut 17,000 jobs, or 10% of its workforce, with 60-day notices going out as soon as next month, according to a source. It was not clear when and how much the plane maker would eventually raise through the offering, but analysts estimate $10 billion to $15 billion is needed for Boeing to be able to maintain its credit ratings, which are now just one notch above junk. Emirates Airlines President Tim Clark this week became the first senior industry figure to articulate fears over Boeing's ability to tackle its worst ever financial crisis, telling a trade publication there could be a bankruptcy filing in Boeing's future. Meanwhile, U.S. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su met with Boeing and the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers in Seattle on Monday in a bid to break the strike deadlock.
The flood brought a man in front of our house. He was still alive. We brought him into the house and tried to help him, but he died.
Representatives for French soccer player Kylian Mbappe called allegations of rape against him, quote, totally false and a slanderous rumor. Media reports say he's the subject of an investigation over an incident at a hotel in Stockholm last week. Swedish prosecutors have confirmed a probe was launched into an alleged rape. They did not identify a suspect. Sweden's public broadcaster and two dailies named Mbappe as a suspect, citing unnamed sources. Media reports said the 25-year-old had been on a private trip to Stockholm last week with a group of friends. On Monday, he posted a link to a French media story about the matter on social media and called it fake news. Mbappe's lawyer told a French TV channel he had done nothing wrong and that it was unclear if he was the target of the complaint. She said Mbappe would cooperate with the Swedish justice system if he was directly targeted by an investigation.